right now, we are bringing in our first guest this morning. He is a staff reporter for the Wisconsin Examiner who focuses on covering Wisconsin's towns and rural areas. Mr. Henry Redman is our guest this morning. Good morning, Henry. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing really well. You wrote an article last week we talked about entitled "Twin Cities Ice Presence Extends into Wisconsin," and I wanted to know regarding the article. Can you describe what's been happening in Baldwin, Wisconsin, as well as those surrounding areas?
Yeah, I mean, since I surged into the Twin Cities in December, they have been regularly crossing the St. Croix River,
Mhm.
conducting arrests in sort of all of those border communities,
Mhm.
from Hudson, Baldwin, all the way as far east as Eau Claire. These places that are essentially exurbs of the Twin Cities.
Mhm.
ICE, is not stopping at the state border.
Yeah.
They're traveling into Wisconsin pretty regularly.
And I guess that would bring me to the next question of like, what is the overall ice presence in Wisconsin compared to other states? But also, this article shows that they're here. They've been coming here for a while. They've been in Wisconsin for a while. This is not new.
Yeah, we looked at data, I think it was early last fall, comparing ICE arrests in Wisconsin with all of our surrounding, neighboring states. And ICE arrests had increased in under Trump compared to Biden, about 20%, which
Hmm.
was far less than Iowa, Minnesota, Illinois, Michigan. So ICE has been operating in Wisconsin. They have been increasingly operating in Wisconsin, but not as much as we had seen, for example, in Chicago last year, which saw a big, surge of ICE
Hmm.
personnel. But of course, there have been ICE arrests, a few high profile ones, like the one that led to the felony conviction of Hannah Dugan in
Hmm.
Milwaukee, and a big arrest of dairy workers in Manitowoc County last year.
And the in one of the articles, I think it was the one regarding the 20% rise. It said that in Iowa it went up 293% now because they're there as much as they are. But why do you think they are crossing the border? Why do you think they're crossing the border here to Wisconsin during what's now apparently going to be shut down according to Tom Homan? But why do you think that is?
I mean, I think it's just proximity. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Western Wisconsin has a sizable Hispanic community, dairy farms and
Mm-hmm.
Ashley Furniture and all sorts of, small to medium sized kind of manufacturing businesses, Mexican restaurants in Baldwin last week. The raid included a Mexican restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, they're trying to bump up those numbers.
Yeah.
So it's 45 minutes from the Twin Cities to Hudson. Like might as well swing across the border. You're already in the area.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel like a lot of people would probably think themselves, well, they have their operation in Minnesota. Why would they violate their operation? But I think you said is like if they can get in a car and go a little bit west or wherever and arrest more people to bump up their numbers, it makes sense uh, to them. I should say it makes sense to them. What have you been hearing from the community? I mean, in the reporting, it's very clear there are opinions on this matter. But what is the climate, the temperature like in these communities right now with this happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on it a little bit there, but even though these communities are so linked to the Twin Cities, people work in the Twin Cities, people who work in these Wisconsin communities live in the Twin Cities, they
Hmm.
shop there. I met people in Baldwin who said they got healthcare at the VA hospital where
Hmm.
Alex Preddy worked.
Yeah.
There's like they get Twin Cities TV news, but for a lot of the Trump voting section of this very rural conservative county, it feels separate.
Hmm.
And oftentimes they are cheering on ICE actions in the Twin Cities and even in their own communities. But there has been, I think, a growing sense of discomfort in
Hmm.
the area on ICE in these small communities and how that's and it is dividing people. Someone
Hmm.
told me that they had started to talk in kind of codes, winks and nods, trying to suss out who is on their side on things,
Yes.
because It is a little different from the Twin Cities in that everyone's more spread out in rural Wisconsin. If
Yeah.
ICE is on your street, you don't have, you know, dozens of neighbors who can step outside and be right there to witness,
Hmm.
but you do have people trying to observe ICE actions in these communities. You have people bringing groceries to Hispanic families that are essentially in hiding.
Yeah.
Because in Wisconsin, if you're undocumented, you can't get a driver's license. You have people driving them around to doctor's appointments and to work and kids to school. And so there is this community response happening, but it is under different circumstances because it's such a red Trump supporting place.
And that's something I had a question here for you regarding what the community is doing who support here. The those who want to protect the immigrant community have created, as you said, it's like their own network, and it includes the you know winks and nods and texting and calling and doing everything you can to vet people in your community without letting on. Like it's like an underground network they've created in this small town to help these individuals. Can you talk more about like what they've developed? Is it really like an official code? And also you said that they are becoming legal observers as well. So it seems like they're building, even in a small area, a very tight network of supporters who can operate almost in the shadows.
Yeah, I don't think it's an official code. I think it's just, talking to someone trying to look for signs that they might not be supportive of what ICE is doing. I think
Hmm.
there is a lot of paranoia in
Hmm.
the community because ICE has been around and because there is a significant subset of the residents who support ICE's actions in,
Hmm.
these communities. I had a hard time trying to, report on what exactly local residents are doing because they're scared to let people in. They're scared, the
Yeah.
feds are, driving around the area, parking outside of school buildings, and then you have like this added interpersonal conflict with people who you see all the time. These are small, tight knit, rural Wisconsin communities, but you know who they voted for, and
Hmm.
likely that they're still supporting ICE. So
Yeah.
what does that do for your sense of well being and trying to get by in this small place where you can't really hide?
If you're just joining us on Civic Media Mid Mornings, we are talking to Henry Redman, who is a staff reporter for the Wisconsin Examiner. He focuses his stories on Wisconsin towns and the rural areas. And you brought up a really good point there that I was going to bring up a little later, but I'll talk about it now and ask you a question here with regard to people talking about this topic with you. I imagine the folks who support the immigrant community were nervous. Did you talk to anybody who was just like, "Yes, let's do it," or are they even hesitant to show their support as not to be outed as someone who's for this very unpopular action that's we're seeing across America? What was the support for like out there? Anyone talking to you?
Um, yeah, I talked to a few people, and my email inbox after the story came out was full of people saying, sharing their support for ICE's actions
Yeah.
in St. Croix County. I mean, a little bit. I think that it's there's not a ton of that in the story because it's not that interesting to me that people in a Trump supporting county support the Trump
Hmm.
administration. Um, so yes, there's plenty of people still supporting Trump in this red county. When I was at the candlelight vigil in Baldwin a few weeks ago, people were angrily honking their horns and
Hmm.
yelling out their windows as they drove by. So like it is divisive. People, are still supportive of Trump and of ICE in the area. A few people I spoke with do feel like there is some movement as it, you know, becomes a little uncomfortable for people when it's right on their doorstep and their favorite Mexican restaurant has to shut down.
Hmm. And that is, I think that's an important thing you just brought up there, and I wanted to write that. I wrote this down because I thought it was, apart from the mental, and for some people in this article, spiritual problems this is causing for them, this has an economic impact on the community because employees and small businesses are being directly affected, which directly affects the communities. Can you speak more on that as well, as far as who they're arresting, where they are arresting them, and what has happened because of it?
Yeah, it's, restaurants, Mexican like, Hispanic grocery stores. And I, in my reporting, learned that, a handful of gas stations had to shut down in the Baldwin area, the Hispanic grocery store, restaurants, Thai and Indian restaurants, even
Hmm.
not just, Mexican. And, these small communities, there's only so many businesses, and the ripple effects can, end up being quite large when, people aren't going to work or businesses aren't open.
Yeah, yeah. Um, with regard to, like when you look at the communities, the Twin Cities versus Baldwin and Hudson, and those, they're very, very small communities. Do you believe that maybe one of the reasons why they chose to come into these areas is because of small communities? They're not able to organize the way the Twin Cities are. Like you said, people on corners taking video, making themselves known, versus these smaller communities where it's a lot easier to come in and arrest people because there's not a lot of folks out there, and folks do support this. Do you think that maybe one of the reasons why they chose these small communities?
I think that could be part of it. I
Mhm.
I spent a lot of time talking to people on how they're thinking about response and supporting Hispanic communities in Western Wisconsin, specifically because it's more difficult, and how the strategies by necessity have to change. If
Mhm.
you're on a dairy farm, the closest person could be 10, 15 minutes away. So what are the people trying to help do if you can't get there to observe? And oftentimes it has been, you know, helping with the after effects. Someone gets arrested by ICE and is taken away and detained. What is their family doing? How are their kids getting to school? How
Mhm.
are groceries getting to their house? Things like that.
When we come back on the other side, we're going to talk with Henry Redman, who is the author, I mean, the writer, author, you write, of the article Twin Cities ICE Presence Extends into Wisconsin in the Wisconsin Examiner. He is a staff reporter for the Wisconsin Examiner. We're going to talk more about this going on here, how is it affecting the local police, and how that relationship between the police and community is being, there's more tension now. But we're going to talk more with Henry on that on the other side of the break. Don't go anywhere. Stay tuned, stay close. You're listening to Civic Media Mid Mornings. Welcome back to Civic Media Mid Mornings here on the Civic Media Radio Network. My name is Greg Bach. I'm your host, your buddy, your pal, your believer in the oncoming weekend and your right to relax. I hope you're having a good morning. I'm glad you're here sharing your time with us. If you want to be part of the conversation, 855-752-4842, 855-75-CIVIC. Leave a comment on that live stream. We are on Facebook, YouTube, and the platform we still call Twitter. Angela Lang still ahead after the 10 o'clock break, talking about the DEI ballot measure in the fall election, and then we'll be talking sports with J.R. Radcliffe. But right now, we are continuing our discussion with Henry Redman, who is a staff writer with the Wisconsin Examiner. He put out a piece last week regarding Twin City or ICE's presence in Wisconsin as it in concert with their, which will be now being ended, their presence in Minnesota. But one of the things we talked about during the break is that you wrote a brief yesterday regarding Barron County Sheriff and what he had to say regarding concern of ICE in their community. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so Barron County, just a little bit further north, from St. Croix, which we've been talking about. ICE was in Barron County last weekend on Sunday looking for some people that apparently they were unable to find.
Mm-hmm.
This caused, a kerfuffle in the community of people trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
And the sheriff posted on Facebook essentially saying, like, do your own research. Don't, just believe the headlines about
Yeah.
ICE, saying, you should get your information about ICE activity from the ICE website and the people they say they're apprehending. Which, like, the Trump administration has been saying, since last year, we're going after the worst of the worst.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's no way that, you can look at the data we've seen and think that
Mm-hmm.
that is anywhere close to true. Um, CBS News earlier this week, looked at the data and found that less than 14% of the people arrested by ICE have been charged or convicted of violent crimes.
Mm-hmm.
Data from Wisconsin showed mostly, people they've been arresting here has been, people who have been charged with but not yet convicted of crimes, often not violent crimes.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you're picking someone up before that process in the county circuit court is over, this county circuit court system doesn't get to conclude its case, which, especially if it's a violent crime,
Hmm.
leaves the victims hanging on getting, real closure on that case. Instead, this person just kind of disappears into
Yeah.
this federal system, and then the locals don't really know what's going on. I mean, I the sheriffs across Wisconsin have signed up for cooperating with ICE. They've, uh, signed these 287G agreements
Hmm.
to essentially make deputies, you know, ICE agents in all but name.
Yeah.
But, you know, I don't think you can say that. I think it's impossible to say that ICE has been truthful about what they've been doing in Wisconsin or across the country.
I mean, I think from my opinion standpoint, it's a lot of what we've seen regarding the administration on the whole. It's a lot of show. There's not a lot of planning. It's about shock and awe and look what we did, and then worry about the details later. And that the 287G program is something that was brought up for a possible bill to force sheriffs to work with them, as you mentioned during the break. I believe it backed off, which is good because there was a punishing factor in there. But talking about the police, can you speak more on St. Croix County's relationship with ICE as far as how they are working with them officially versus not officially?
Yeah, so officially, the St. Croix County Sheriff's Office and departments like the Baldwin Police Department say that they are not cooperating with ICE. The St. Croix County official written policy is, they're not going to ask victims and witnesses of crimes for their immigration status. If they have someone in the jail who they believe might be undocumented, they are allowed under the policy to call ICE.
Yeah.
Um, the Baldwin Police Department, the chief told me that they are not cooperating with ICE. However, I heard report after report from members of the community seeing Baldwin PD and ICE officers chatting it up before
Hmm.
and after arrests operations in the community, which is straining the relationship in this community, like we said before the break, that is already,
Hmm.
kind of at the seams with how this is affecting the interpersonal relationships depending on what side of this issue you fall on. And, you know, like immigrant advocacy groups all over have said since this started, like, if the cops are perceived as helping ICE, then you're going to get less participation in the criminal justice process from
Hmm.
Hispanic communities. If someone's a victim of a crime and they're worried that the local cops are friendly with ICE, they're not going to report the crime.
Hmm.
If someone witnesses a crime, they're not going to come forward and say like what they saw. So it does have these effects on local crime that I don't think makes these places safer.
I mean, honestly, you answered what was going to be my last question, which is how is this relationship slash non-relationship affecting the community? And you said perfectly right there that it's just creating more problems, and it's problems for the police because their job is to solve these crimes, to work on these cases, and if people aren't participating because they're like, I don't trust you, this is definitely a problem. Henry Redman is a staff reporter for the Wisconsin Examiner. We will make sure that both the article itself we talked about as well as the brief that we just brought up will be in the show notes as well. Henry, thank you so much for being here this morning. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.